I'm going to talk about this subject that is of concern to all of us, what's happening with the international monetary system, and in particular what is happening to the dollar that, as my colleagues have already expressed, has been the pillar of the international monetary system for many years, but at the same time it is subject to a number of areas of opportunity, if I may call them that way, that independently of the commentaries or recommendations we can make beyond the United States borders, I think it's only them who can try to fix them. Anyway, just a principle of Mexican diplomacy is not to get involved in other countries' policy. Anyway, I want to talk about what I believe are some of the reasons why we see the dollar tumbling in international monetary markets, and what's going on with the other currencies, and what can we expect from these transformations that we are observing all over the globe. So, in recent times, we have heard a number of important voices talk about the decline or the definitive abandonment of the dollar as the most important currency of reserve. We have heard people like the President of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, saying that what was true in 1945 can no longer be true today. The dollar cannot claim to be the only reserve currency in the world. Then we have other commentaries like, for example, Dr. Chandra Mustafa, who is an activist in Malaysia. He says it's one of the pillars of U.S. hegemony, and the signs indicate that we are on the cusp of a major change. And then we have the central banker of China, Mr. Zhou Xiaochuan, who says that to rely more heavily on special drawing rights created by the International Monetary Fund as a reserve currency is a good idea. That's just something similar to what Professor Ocampo just mentioned a moment ago. So, what can we say about the determination of the exchange rate? Well, we know that supply of dollars results from all the purchases that the American economy makes to the rest of the world, and the demand for dollars results from what the United States exports to the rest of the world. So if the balance of payments was the only mechanism through which dollars are demanded and supplied, we would have an equilibrium based on imports and exports, as well as capital transfers, of course, in one direction and the other. It would be relatively simple to determine what is the equilibrium level of the exchange rate for the dollar. But we know that in the United States economy, there has been a profound current deficit increasing from the early 1990s to approximately 2006, 2007, when we have the lowest level of current account level of the highest current account deficit, as a matter of fact. And we know that from that moment onwards, the recession and the financial crisis have reduced this current deficit. But this is equivalent to a shift of the supply curve of dollars towards the right, and that's why we have a lower equilibrium level for the exchange rate, and that has propelled a number of speculations regarding the fact that maybe it's time for the euro to overtake the dollar, or maybe the special drawing rights to replace the dollar, or even the renminbi to replace the dollar in international transactions and in as a reserve currency. So is it really time for the decline of the U.S. dollar? We know that history tells about a number of experiences where empires have reached the climax and then have disappeared, or at least vanished from the first or the most notable place. And from that we can tell that maybe there is a point of a turning point for the importance of the U.S. dollar. However, just briefly, I want to mention some of the aspects that I believe are do not support that theory or that hypothesis. One of them is that we see that the current account deficit as a percentage of GDP for the United States has turned around precisely starting in 2007, 2008, 2009, and now it is at a much more reasonable level compared to other countries. However, we have other indicators that tell us how strong or weak a currency may be. One of them is what is the indebtedness of a country's of a country with the rest of the world. We know about Greece's current difficulties, and we know that in good part it is due to its external debt. But just to give you some information about the level of indebtedness of the United States, even when we talk about huge deficits in the order of the trillions of dollars, we can see that the USA external debt is less than 100%. That when compared to other countries doesn't seem to be so big. It's big by any standards, and more so if we look at it in absolute terms, but it is not greater than, for example, Germany's or Spain's or Italy's or other European countries, nor greater than Switzerland, nor greater than Sweden or Hong Kong, etc., etc. So, well, I'm just trying to put together some pieces of information to show how this looks. I also support the arguments of Professor Savona when he tells that the trend of emerging countries has been to accumulate reserves. From the 1990s onwards, we see an increased accumulation of foreign currency reserves as a measure to protect against the turbulence that sometimes happens in international markets. And we also see that among emerging countries, some have distinguished themselves by the huge volume of international reserves that they have accumulated. And that's the case of China in particular. Nowadays, China's economy holds reserves in the order of more than its participation. Then we look at the yen, it is decreasing its participation. Look at the pound sterling and marginally increasing its participation. Then if the trend towards the abandonment of the US dollar was non-contestable, I believe that we should be observing statistics that confirm this in a more clear form. All right, so briefly, as I said, I'm trying to present arguments that indicate that even when the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar in particular are facing severe problems, more so as a consequence of the crisis, which we know was really expensive and really complicated, it has affected a number of companies, not only in the financial sector, but also in the manufacturing sector, services sector, and so on. We know that also many countries are losing faith on the dollar because of that. But when we look at the evidence, the statistical evidence suggests that the U.S. dollar and the U.S. dollar markets are so huge and so important nowadays that it is very difficult that this will change from one day to the next. I have no doubts that in the long run, other currencies, including the special drawing rights, I really like the argument about the importance of special drawing rights that Professor Galano presented, and I would like to talk to him more about this. But at this point, I just want to say that even when we can say that we can trust that in the future we will see other currencies taking a more active role as a currency reserve, or as transactions currencies, in the short term, in the very immediate term, the dollar is likely to remain as the most important, maybe for decades to come. I don't know if too many decades, but at least from here to 2020, I don't see that the dollar will be left aside. Of course, this also generates a number of considerations, including the fact that the U.S. government should be more co-responsible with the rest of the G20 economies, to say the least, because, of course, we know that whatever they do is going to affect the rest of the countries, and that's something that should be, to some extent, will at least discussed. We know we have not big influence on the Americans' decisions, but the G20 or the G19 versus the United States, maybe we can have some influence on whatever they do and the way they manage their currency in the near future. So, well, I believe those are my comments to this point. I thank you for your attention and thank you for the invitation very much.